Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
President Joe Biden is looking at what he can do on the climate, and it renews a question about how serious are Democrats about climate change. And you might be saying, well, wait a minute, guys, right? These are the folks that the Green New Deal and the Republicans are laying into them because, you know, they're just all a bunch of tree huggers or whatever they're saying now, right? About how serious Democrats are about climate change. And I'm not saying that there aren't some that are. And you would even say, well, Joe Biden, he's done all these things, right, in his first 100 days, all these executive orders. But do they actually make any measurable difference in the quality of our climate? And we're also going to talk about the idea of carbon pricing. So we've got a lot to talk about today. But of course, we could not begin a conversation on climate change, the Democrats, and the oil and gas industry without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
You know, today's episode's not about recycling, but on our walk last night, my wife and I were noticing as our neighbors had put out their trash, how many people don't recycle, you know, and that's part of climate change. And that we had a conversation for a few minutes about, you know, well, should you or shouldn't you? And does it make a difference, or is it moral licensing and make us feel better about ourselves? And I think that's kind of in a small stream where the Democrats are right now. You know, yes, you do have those people that are really pushing it, but it's like, well, you know, how much do we really do? And then if you've been watching regular television like us old people do, Ford and GM are both pushing their new electric vehicles that are coming out. The word of the day, climatology, climatology. It is a noun, the science dealing with climate and climatic phenomena. So that's basically it, folks. You know, it's like, this is happening. Are we going to do anything about it, or just watch it deteriorate or get better on its own? Are we going to roll the dice and just let it happen per chance? Or are we as humans who we know affect our climate, are we going to do what we can to try to make our climate better?
I just want people to know that Lance has in the studio with him a red covered Webster's Dictionary, Webster's New World Dictionary, the second college edition. We're talking about the physical one, and you got the little speckled red on the side of the pages and the number indentation or the letter indentation so that you can get to where you need to go quickly. I mean, that's where we're talking about when he says word of the day, and he is looking this up in an old fashioned paper book as we're talking about climate change. Just a side note. But the important thing, how long have you had that dictionary though?
I don't know, forever. I carried it. I mean, it was in my classroom because when I needed when students would ask, the copyright is, of this edition is 1984.
Okay.
So probably when I walked into my classroom for the first time in 1984, I took this with me. And since I retired and don't have a classroom anymore, it was in my study. And, so I bring it back and forth from home to the studio, because if I'm at home and I need a word, this is what I go to.
You know, the government, yes, has done some things over the years to try to push us in this direction. But part of what's happening, and I think it's most notable amongst car manufacturers, right, is they are realizing that they're going to have to make this change. And so let's get out in front of it and let's embrace it. Because two things. One, the sooner they make the switch, the easier it's going to be. But also because let's get the positive PR, right? Nobody's making us do this right now. Nobody's forcing us to do it. So why not just, you know, we do it and then play up that look how great we are because we're doing it. And at the same time, there is actually a positive effect to doing it.
Well, you know, look at how much money Tesla's making and how much their investments are worth and their company's worth and how much new money they're getting because of their electric vehicles. And so if for no other reason, it's the proper thing to do if you want your company to make money, right? because there's money to be made. People are investing in companies that are doing things with electric vehicles.
The article that we're referencing today is, we've got both a New York Times and Wall Street Journal piece. You can find them at thestateofus.org. And as you are listening today, and if you have comments, send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org, podcast@thestateofus.org. We'd like to hear from you.
Hey, ring the bell. Now, in the first segment, you got one in.
Yeah, I did.
I like that. It's segment 1, not the end of segment 2 or the beginning of segment 3. So for those of you who never get through the whole show, now you know how to get a hold of us.
That's right. But see, usually,
but I don't know why you're not getting through the whole show, because this is so entertaining. Why you don't stay to the end? Because when I do my reads about where you can find the show is like world famous. I've been thinking about getting a trademark, because there are people that listen because
just for that,
I change it at the end. You know,
that's right.
You never know how I'm going to spit it out.
So President Biden announced, as we talked about, a slew of climate related executive orders, including things like rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, canceling the Keystone XL pipeline, and suspending new oil and gas leasing on public lands. Regardless of whether or not you think those are good things, at the end of the day, most of those things, while sound good, right, that's about as far as they go. In terms of real impact on changing things, it has more to do with the principle of it, I think, than it has to do with the effect of it. And that's part of what we're talking about today, is this question of, are Biden and the Democrats really serious about climate change? Because part of what we've seen, and, you know, over the last 4 years, it feels like we've talked a lot about the Republicans being two-faced, right? And like for now, right, we're hearing from all these Republicans about how our debt suddenly matters. And it's like, ooh, where was that the last 4 years when you increased the deficit by $6 trillion? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
What exactly, where was that when you did those things? So the point is, right, that both parties do this. And part of what we're looking at today is that things like U.S. emissions have actually been falling for the last decade. And that's thanks in large part to years of federal investment in clean technology, from research and development to loan guarantees to tax credits. Today, wind, solar, battery, and electric vehicle technologies are increasingly competitive in many parts of the world. And this one, I think, is of particular note. First among them is the long-standing belief that the nation can meet its energy needs with wind and solar energy alone. Wind and solar are great as far as they go, but there are limits to how far that is. Because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, powering an electrical grid entirely with wind and solar energy is a dubious proposition. To reliably provide electricity when and where it is needed without fossil fuels, most analyses find that the electrical grids need substantial reserves of what the Princeton engineering professor has dubbed, quote, firm, low-carbon generation. Keep in mind, the two biggest issues, okay, with fossil fuels are, one, they are limited, right? Now, there may be an abundance of things. They may not run out in the next 100 years, but they're going to run out at some point. There is just a finite amount of them on our planet, right? So no matter how good our drilling technology gets, no matter how efficient things are, at some point, it's going to go away. And I suppose you could technically say the same thing about the sun, but we're talking about, you know, millions or hundreds of millions of years away. So I think that, comparatively speaking,
by the time the sun disappears, our climate will be such that we as humans, as we now exist, would not be able to stay alive.
Yeah, we'll have a lot bigger problems when the sun stops shining.
We may evolve, you know, as the climate changes so that we can stay alive. But the sun is a no-brainer issue.
So the point there, though, is that those two problems you talk about is there's a finite supply, and the big one that we talk about a lot is the emissions. The finite supply thing, there's not an immediate way to solve. The emission thing, however, there is some promising stuff in the works, notably carbon capture, that could make an appreciable difference in our ability to use those technologies, because if we have the ability to take the carbon out of the air and store it or run it down, that's going to make a big impact immediately to the condition of our climate. And that's the point of, that's what we don't see being invested in right now by the federal government. And we don't hear Democrats or Republicans, for that matter, really talking about carbon capture or technologies like it very often. Could carbon pricing be a potential solution? Because Biden's basically said that's on the sideline. So why did he say it's on the sideline when the industry is saying, hey, we might be open to this? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
It's kind of interesting. The Wall Street Journal came out with an article on March 24th that said carbon tax sidelined in Biden's push on climate taxes. And 6 days ago, today is the 31st of March, March 25th, basically, the American Petroleum Institute endorses carbon pricing as oil and gas industry faces pressure on emissions. So right at about the time that Biden's saying, yeah, that's probably not going to be part of our plan, the oil and gas industry is basically saying, hey, we'd be open to this. So kind of interesting there, right? Now, important, this is one of those times where we sometimes use things like a carbon tax and carbon pricing interchangeably. They are not necessarily interchangeable. So when we talk about something like carbon pricing, understanding that basically it's a market-based strategy for lowering global emissions. The aim is basically to put a price on carbon emissions, so that an actual monetary value and the cost of climate impacts are higher for higher emitting things, lower for lower emitting things. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do this. For example, a carbon tax would be one of them. But generally, that's the principle, right? So if I am an oil and gas producer, I have to pay, for example, for the emissions that I put out. If I operate a plant, I may have to pay for that. There's also been discussion about, as consumers, for example, you might attach the carbon tax onto gasoline, And the concern here, I guess, has been, and this is where are the Democrats really serious about this? The far left has said that doing something like a carbon tax will disproportionately affect low-income individuals, so therefore we can't do it. And that's the question of, you said you care about the climate. This is something that may or may not help, and that's part of the issue, is there's some debate about, Democrats don't talk about this necessarily, but there's some debate about whether or not this would actually make any real difference, because the industry is already going this way, right? I mean, just the very nature that the oil and gas industry of all industries is saying we're open to this is a sign that, look, they've already decided they're going to invest, right, in new means of energy, in low emitting forms of energy. They've already decided that the future of their business is dependent on making certain changes.
Well, that's could be one answer. The other answer is, too, we don't want the government and the American people to come after us. So therefore, we're going to take the lead and we're going to say, well, see, here's what we're willing to do. And that's going to stop you from hitting us even harder with a higher tax or higher emission standards or more miles per gallon for vehicles. If you get out and take the lead and say, here's what we're willing to do, then you're trying to also stop the people that want to punish you, who want to make things a little more extreme. You take a little bit of wind out of their sails. So it's a good tactic for the big oil companies and for the big companies to say, well, we're willing to do this, because then it makes you look, it's a grandiose plan on their part. It's a grandstanding to some degree, because they know, as you said, it's going to happen anyway. So if we say up front, before it ever starts, here's what we're willing to do, then it makes it harder for you to get what you want, because people are going to say, well, see, they're willing to work with you. So why don't you take their, and I'm just pulling numbers out of my hat right now, take their 10% cut. Why are you going after a 50% cut? Well, because the science shows that a 50% cut is what we need to lower the world's temperature, which will stop the ice caps from melting and which will, keep the oceans from rising and wiping out 1/3 of all the coastland in the world. That's why we want 50%. Oh, but Big Oil's saying they'll give you 10, so take the 10, and why do we have to have a fight? And let's just move on. So I think a lot of it is a ploy. It's what you do when you know people are coming after you. You give in a little bit to see if that's enough to placate them, because then you don't have to do as much as you fear you might. So that's the other take on that I would say. But again, any movement is better than the status quo. However, if you're not an aficionado of this topic, we're running out of time. And or we're not. And if we're not, you're going to be right in 40 years. And if I'm right, you're going to be wanting to buy my house because I'm protected by the Appalachian and Rocky Mountains. And so the water's not going to get to where I live. And if you're on the coast, you're going to be flooded. So there's your, either change and lower the global temperature by doing these things and don't run that risk, or run that risk and then come buy my property because it'll be worth a whole lot more because I won't be flooded.
And I think the other thing is, we see obviously the increasing amount of severe weather that's taking place that threatens most of the world in one way or another. It is, I think we discount, right, that this is the only home we have right now. I mean, yes, there are some promising things happening, some, reinvestment in space exploration, but at the moment, it's not practical for us to just pick up and leave and go live someplace else.
Well, I mean, look at the West Coast, right? We talk about the fires, and the fires are because it's so dry. So then we have the fires. Well, then they're rainy season, and they get torrential rains. They don't just get, ground soaking rains meaning that when it rains, the earth has time to absorb it and green up and grow the roots. They get these torrential rains that then lead to mudslides. Folks, that's all part of the drastic climate change that's going on because it's too dry and everything turns to kindling and it burns. And then when it burns, there are no plants, there are no roots in the ground to absorb the water that's coming faster than normal. And so it's like, oh, they just got all that rain and then the mudslide. So see, now they're complaining because they got rain. No, it's because the rain comes after the fires and there's nothing to soak up the rain that comes down. And you have all this burn over area. And that's all part of this, people. It's not just tornadoes and hurricanes and those climactic weather changes, but it's things like that, And where is it? I think I just read in Phoenix, Arizona, in the Arizona area, they have like historic droughts. I mean, like that hasn't been seen since they've been keeping records for the last 150 years out there.
And so the point, though, is that things like carbon pricing have to be part of the battle, because is carbon pricing going to fix the issue? No, it's not. Is it going to affect all of us? Yeah, probably, because there might be like 0.01% of the population that actually has a carbon neutral footprint. But that's very difficult to do in today's age, even if you want to do it. I think I would say that my household is a household that would like to do it. We've gone, above and beyond what your average American does, in an effort to do our part.
Right. You bought an electric vehicle. You've put in solar panels. You're getting a more efficient heating and cooling system put in. So you're making all the changes that everybody talks about. You're not just picking one or two. You're doing all of them.
Right. But one of the keys here is, and one of the reasons we've been able to do it now is because the economies of scale have come into play and made it not only the right thing to do for the economy, but the financially savvy thing to do. And that's part of why I guess I want to put this note. Even though politicians are going to do their things, right? Even though Biden may be saying we're not doing carbon pricing, or at least not right now, right? And by the way, he's got a goal, right, to get greenhouse gas emissions to zero in electricity by 2035 and the entire economy by 2050. No small goal. One that note he won't actually be around to see through. So, and that's not it's great that he wants to do that, but at the same time, it's always, well, we're promising things that you're not actually going to be able to follow through with. You can set us on that route, but the point is that the economy is making those changes, right? As more people have gotten solar panels installed on their homes, the price of them has gone down drastically. The benefit of them continues to go up because they become more efficient. And so now what you look at is, for somebody like us, right? We've been able to install solar panels, and we actually pay less for the panels than what our average electric bill used to be. So even though it doesn't 100% offset our electric, generally speaking, for the first 2 or 3 years, our cost is the same, right? So you're saying, well, wait, you're not actually saving money. No, but 2 caveats there. The value of the home goes up because you have panels. And after about year 3 or 4, as energy prices continue to go up, now guess what happens? That gap continues to widen, right? They started out equal, but the cost of my panels stays the same. I pay the same for those financed every month for the next 25 years. I'll pay the exact same amount.
So basically you're neutral for the first 2 to 4 years. And after that, you start to see a savings.
Exactly.
So you're not going in the hole. I mean,
exactly.
Bottom line is, it's not costing you anything. You may not be seeing a savings in the first 2 to 4 years, but you're not seeing an increase in cost either. And from that point on,
the benefit is there.
You see the savings.
Right. And that's the exponential benefit, right? And if you go out there and you call up most solar companies, they'll do the math for you, and they'll give you the graph and say, here's your savings the first 2 or 3 years. Here's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years out. Here's how much money you're going to save approximately, and it becomes very real, folks. I mean, you have the opportunity to invest now in something that makes a difference to your bottom line. Forget about if you care about the planet. Hopefully you do it because of that, but that's not the only reason.
Well, but even for somebody older like me, who will not maybe be around to even see a lot of the big gains, it's going to make my property worth more.
Exactly.
So even if I don't have that save the planet mentality, it's a cheap way to improve the value of your property in the future.
Sure. Because if you can buy a home with solar panels, I mean, just sit there and ask yourself, right? I'm at home right now. You're looking to buy a house. I can buy a home with solar panels or without solar panels. And I mean, it seems like I'd want to buy the one with the solar panels if the home had everything else that I wanted, right? Because who doesn't want to be able to create their own power without having to do anything? And that's basically the proposition, right? I mean, that's essentially the proposition that you're being offered. So I think that's important to understand. And it's similar in the electric vehicle market as well. Those are the big areas that we're starting to see some shifts in, where it's not only becoming the right thing to do, right, to buy an electric vehicle, it's actually becoming a major cost savings option for people. I was able to purchase a, quote unquote, top of the line mid-market vehicle. So not a luxury vehicle, but, middle of the road vehicle. I was able to purchase one of those, top tier models with all the bells and whistles for like $32,000 out of pocket. That's not something that we were even talking about 5 years ago to get an electric vehicle.
Yep.
Things are changing in that realm. And as they continue to come down in price, it becomes not only practical for you to buy it, but also the best thing for you to do financially. And that's why we're going to talk about here in the next segment is, what should the government be doing? What is going to make the biggest difference? And are there some things in Biden's plan that might actually be pretty good? Because it sounds like the Democrats are kind of got their hands tied here and can't really decide, well, we're for some things, but some of these other things we don't want to do. So what's the reality? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Willer.
We've talked some about the idea of carbon pricing, about some of Biden's plan. And for what it's worth, we're still waiting on some of the more intricate details about the particularly the infrastructure plan, because it's interesting and noteworthy, Lance, I think, right, that Biden has basically said we're setting aside guns and immigration for right now. We're going to come back to them, but I'm going to focus on infrastructure.
Well, we listened for 4 years of President Trump saying infrastructure, and it never got done.
Well, we've been listening to it for even longer than that, haven't we?
Well,
haven't politicians been saying for like 20 years that we need to do something? If you want to be
fair, yes, So I guess it's, and we know, right, from all the different studies and nonprofits that we've interviewed and talked to over the years, it's got infrastructure has a 70 to 80% support rate with the American people. So it's like, okay, everybody wants to do it and the government keeps talking about it. So, yes, immigration is an issue. Yes, guns are an issue. But at the same time, is it smart politically to do the issues that the people want? I mean, the same thing with, no matter how you feel about the stimulus bill, 1.9 trillion, all the polls said 70 to 80% of the people in America, one of the highest ever, over 80%. Were in favor of it. So if you've got 70-80% that are in favor of infrastructure, why not go after it? Why not do this? I think the key here is what we need, and we're hitting the Democrats today, but we need bipartisanship support for these issues because, as the articles say, they don't say this, but my summation is executive actions will not get the job done. It's not going to get the desired results because it goes on and saying, well, here's what President Biden did, and he's reinstituting what President Obama did, which undid what President Trump did. If all we do are executive actions every time we change political parties in the White House, then it's all undone. So in order to get it in place to make it actually happen by 2035 and 2050, we need bipartisanship. We need Republicans and Democrats to sign on to it because that will make it law, which then will make it a lot tougher to stop. As long as it's just executive actions, we run the risk of every 4 years or every 8 years of it changing and being upended, and then we're never going to see the gains that we'd like to see. So yes, we can get on the Democrats, and I'm all about, come on now, this is what you said, let's go. But at the same time, because they can't pass anything they want in the Senate because they don't have 60 votes, we're losing out. So anyway, so now let's go on and talk about what they should be doing. But I think that's the key point is these executive actions aren't going to get the job done. We need some bipartisanship support. If we can meet at 50 and have bipartisan support, that's better than an executive action.
Well, and at the end of the day, things like infrastructure, right? It's not a question of if we need to do something. Because we got to do something, right? I mean, we're going to have more bridges that are just going to collapse. Our roads are going to continue to get worse.
The last great infrastructure bill was the Great Depression, or if you want to say in the 1950s, Eisenhower's interstate highway system. So I mean, it's been at least 70 years, and you could argue almost 90 years since we've done anything to the infrastructure.
And if you look at the history of our nation, so much of the big leaps forward, right? Things like the railroads, things like, FDR's plan, things like Eisenhower's plan, those were big steps forward for the nation, right? I mean, they made huge differences to how people lived and worked and where they could go and what they could do. And it wasn't just about propping up the economy. While that was a huge component, it was also about just making life generally better, right? The interstate highway system all of a sudden made it really practical for people to travel, for example, on a regular basis from Ohio to Florida, which is now this huge thing, right? I mean, freaking half the people or more in Florida in the winter are not Floridians. They're from other places in the country. And whether or not you think that's a good thing, those sorts of things, the opportunities to travel have been greatly increased as a result. We've become a more mobile nation as a result of those investments. And overall, that's been a boost for the economy. People spend more, companies make more. That's a positive thing in the type of economy that we have. So that's where we have an opportunity to really make an impact. And it doesn't sound like something that's exciting or sexy, but imagine how the world would change, right? If here in Urbana, Ohio, I could get to New York City in an hour. And you might say, well, that's crazy. It's not an option. Yeah, it is. It's an option. Most of the technology is either in development or already exists to make things like that possible. It's a question of, are we going to get serious about investing in things that are going to transform the economy? Because those sorts of things, and you would say, wait, we're talking about climate change. This is a huge part of it, okay? Because a very substantial portion of all emissions are the result of our transportation economy, not just personal vehicles, but moving goods and services across the nation. And if we can transform our rail networks, right? If we can do a better job of moving goods and people, if we can transform our roads, highways, bridges, et cetera, waterways, all of that's going to make a very appreciable difference in the quality of our environment. And it's going to slow down and in some cases reverse some of the damage that we're doing. So I think it's, yes, are electric vehicles great? Yeah, but that's not the only thing that we got to talk about when we're talking about let's make a difference with climate change. Because there's opportunities, and like, here's one, Lance, that comes to my mind that it's easy to overlook. Congestion in big cities, air quality, right? One of the issues is the centralization of people. It causes all kinds of challenges that you don't have if people aren't packed together like that. There's also a lot of benefits to cities, don't get me wrong. But one of the things that we have the opportunity to do with this is improve the environment by allowing people to not have to live right on top of each other. Improve the health of individuals, right? And just give people more options. So it's a plus for the environment. It's also a plus in a lot of other ways. And that's part of why I wish people would stop looking at infrastructure as it's not exciting, because I think it's pretty exciting. When you really think about it, it's not just let's repave the highway, right?
Well, you say high-speed trains and people just roll their eyes like, oh yeah, really, that's going to happen. But let me give you a scenario just in 3 generations. When my mom, okay, would travel from Missouri to Louisville, Kentucky to see her brother, it was a 2-day trip because they were on 2-lane highways and had to go through every little town and everything else. You can make that trip now in a 1 hour, in a 1 day's drive on using the interstate highway system. Okay. And that's only in the last 60 or 70 years, right? So you say, because people would say, oh, well, we're going to build these interstate highways in the 50s and we're going to cut your travel time. You're going to be able to drive all over the place. And everybody said, yeah, right. No way. Bam. We built the interstate highway system. We got the suburbs. We dispersed the population like you were just talking about. Okay. And now we're doing the same thing if you talk about high-speed trains or something like that. Again, people are poo-pooing it, but it's no different than what we did before. And like you said, you go all the way back to when the federal government said, you know what, we'll give away land to any company who wants to build a railroad. Because again, we're going to disperse. Because instead of taking 4 months to go from Independence, Missouri to, the California coast on the Oregon Trail, we're now going to be able to do it in 2 or 3 days. Oh, there's no way. That'll never happen. My gosh, you can't do that. You're going to replace the horse and buggy. You can't, that's no way. Bam, we did it, and then we came car. It's there, folks. Okay. The history is there to show that this can be done and what it will do, as you said, Justin, for the economy and and also for carbon emission.
And that's why I think infrastructure is the place that you start, because it's the place that we have the opportunity to make big leaps forward the fastest, right? A lot of stuff's already taking place in the energy industry, oil, gas, et cetera. A lot of that's already underway. The big one there that I'd like to see increases in is, continued investment in research in carbon capture technology, because we've talked a lot about, even if we stopped all emissions today, right? Global temperature is still going to go up. And you're going to say, well, wait, why? And that's because we see the effects of what we're doing right now later, right? So things are going to continue to get worse. And so even if we were able to stop them today, which we can't do, I mean, we're talking about 2035 before maybe we get electricity to zero, and 2050 before we get the rest of the economy to zero. And that's a maybe, right? I mean, that's a big maybe. That's going to be a major feat to get that done. We're going to put a a whole bunch more carbon in the atmosphere by the time we get those things done, whether it's then or 25 years after that. We have to have a way to get it back out, because if we really want what many people alive today know as what the climate used to be, my children would never see that. You know, they would never experience that if we don't invest in this stuff. And that's the whole point. And we have to invest in it now so that it gets to a cost-effective standpoint so that it can actually be deployed in a timely manner and get it reversed. Because if we wait until 2050 to get this technology right, then it's going to be, 2100 before we actually start to see the benefits of it. And that's why it's a hard thing. We've talked about that before, Lance. The climate is tough because it's one of those, it's difficult to see, right, on a day-to-day basis. And it's difficult to invest in things that you may not personally get to see the benefits of. But that's why I think the infrastructure component is exciting, because many of us will get to see the benefit of that. And like we talked about, we got to do it anyway. Right? We got to do it anyway.
Right. Needs to be done.
If we want to stay a world power, we got to do it. So why not do it in the most effective way possible? Things like adding charging stations, right? Improving the speed at which people can be transported from place to place and goods, and the way in which they're transported, right? Which reduces emissions as well. So I think there's a lot of exciting stuff happening. I guess the big thing would be, don't dismiss carbon pricing because the far left tells you that it has to be a negative to, low income individuals, because it doesn't. There's ways to do it that doesn't happen. And we also can't let the right tell us that we just shouldn't do anything on climate, right? Or that we have to protect the oil and gas jobs. It's proven time and again that we can replace those jobs with better, cleaner, healthier jobs, right? In clean energy. And that's what we got to do, because at the end of the day, it's going to happen either way. We just have to go after it and get it done. And that's why we're having this conversation, right, Lance?
That's it. Bipartisanship, folks. We have a mission here at True Chat, believe it or not, and it is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've done that today, talking about climatology. And if you've listened to the show and you like it and you share the ideas and people say, well, I'd like to start listening to that show, I want you to be able to tell them how they can get a hold of it. And they can get us by hooking into Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is both a syndicated radio program and a podcast. New episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. East are available for the podcast. You can find the radio show in select talk markets across the nation. We want to hear from you. Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. podcast@thestateofus.org. Lance and I take time to read every one of those and get back to people. Sometimes not super fast, but we do look at them and really appreciate getting to hear what you all have to say. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Thank you to our producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.